Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining me. This is a topic, how to have joyful work, that, I've thought about deeply and researched really over the past 20 years. I can remember when I was much younger in my career, I would go to work and I would see people working, but they didn't seem like they really enjoyed what they did. They were sort of like robots. They'd put on one mask when they went to work, and it seemed like they would take the mask off only to have fun when they got home. And so it always bothered me that if work is something that we're going to spend most of our life at, over a third of our life will be working. Why is it that so many people, not only do they not like their work, but they would leave in a moment if they could. So I want to share with you in this presentation some ideas, some strategies to help you to put together your own roadmap and to help others put together their own roadmap for what I call an authentic life and joyful work. So what is joyful work? What does this really mean? First, I want you to understand it's very subjective. Each person is going to have their own idea about what this means. I mean, the bottom line is, you know what it feels like when you do work that makes you feel excited. Time moves fast. You feel like, I like to call it, you have an extra, bounce in your step. You just feel happy at the end of the day. You're excited. You really can't tell the difference. And I'm serious, between Monday and Friday. Sometimes Monday feels like the best day of the week, and Friday's the worst because you have to wait till the following Monday to continue. When you love your work, when you have joyful work, you really can't tell the difference between work and play, vacation versus vocation. Everything just kind of gels together in a good way. What I've also noticed in my research is that when you enjoy your work, you don't really think about the money. And by the way, I've noticed that when you make money doing what you love, you appreciate and you spend the money more wisely. But when you're in the moment of doing the work, you don't really think about money. When you're doing joyful work, it just feels right to you. It feels authentic. It aligns to your purpose in your life. If you thought about, where you want to make a contribution in the world, joyful work seems to be, right there. And joyful work is internally motivated. You're not doing it because someone said you're good at it, or because you'll get some reward, or because it'll make your spouse or friends or parents, proud of you, but you're doing it because you want to. I've gotten asked over the years a lot, how do I find my passion? How do I do what I love? And here's a simple exercise that you could do on your own. You take a piece of paper, on the left, you write abilities, and you make a list of all the things that you're good at and you're motivated to do. For example, don't make a list of things that you're good at, but not motivated to do. And on the other pieces, the right-hand side of the piece of paper, you make a list of, your deepest interest. If you went to, I call this the bookstore test. If I took you to the largest bookstore, physical bookstore, although they don't really exist anymore, for 2 hours, what part of the bookstore would you go to? And so you make a list of what your deep interests are. And then here's the secret. You start to circle the matches between abilities and interest. Where are the matches? Where's the alignment? And it's the intersection of abilities and interest, where joyful work is, where it lives, where authentic life is, and authentic work. So you might do this on your own as an exercise. It is better to be interested in something and not know how to do it than, of course, to be really good at something and then, be no longer interested. So as I note here, this should be enough incentive for you to think about your own joyful work. You don't want to waste your life doing work that really doesn't matter to you. So why is this important? Well, as I said earlier, we're going to spend a large part of our life working. Work influences all aspects of our life. It influences who we are, our sense of self, our self-esteem. It influences our relationships, our health. If we're parents, how we parent, how we take care of ourselves, our relationship with money, it influences everything in our life. As a test, the next time you go to a party and someone says, hey, what do you do? Try to talk about who you are versus what you do. They'll be a little confused, but it'll start to get you thinking in the right direction. So someone says, Craig, tell me, what do you do? And they just want to hear your job title. But next time you get asked that question, answer with who you are. I'm a parent. I like to work in the garden. I like to exercise. I'm interested in science fiction. Whatever it is for you. Talk about who you are. No one can take away who you are, but of course, someone can take away what you do. So work, and you know this by now, is critical to your life and how you live your life. And I should say the quality of your life as well. Now, joyful work is also important for organizations. I like to recommend to leaders in organizations that the number one thing to measure at work is the joy that people have. Of course, there's many indicators of business, stock price, net profit, customer acquisition, revenue, and so on and so on and so on. But what is most important, I think, to measure is the amount of joy that people have at work. Because when people enjoy their work, all other business indicators I've noticed really go up, from productivity to staying longer in their work, to work relationships, and of course, to working with customers. If you look at the world of work, things are changing, and this was before the pandemic. More and more people want to control their work. Why they work, where they work, what they work on, how they work, and when they work. And of course, the pandemic, with the shelter at home for so many of us, has only increased this need. It's expected that in a few short years, in the US, as an example, 50% of Americans are going to be working independently. And that doesn't mean just working at home. It means, as I like to call it, the Hollywood model. You have a skill, you have a set of passions, and you hire yourself out. Maybe on Monday, you're working half the day for someone doing something. On Tuesday, you have your own company, in your portfolio model, and you're making a product or service. Maybe on Wednesday, you're a contractor on someone else's project, and so on. And this is a model, this independency of working, which is already here, and it's continuing to grow. And so I think we will see more and more trends where companies are going to hire not people to grow their careers, but they're going to hire experts as they need them. And they're going to scale up and down to meet demand. We see that now more than ever before. More and more organizations are going to want to reduce their healthcare cost, which of course is an issue in many societies. And as we've seen with the pandemic, we're realizing that companies need just less physical space. And so this will influence how people work. The new generation, Generation Z, those adults 18 to 23 have really grown up with mobile work. And so this is not something unusual to this generation at all. And this generation will drive this change. So I think the biggest shift now to consider is that the idea of full-time jobs are not really as secure as maybe we thought they were. And in fact, what is more secure is having multiple streams of income which are aligned around your passions. If we look today on the internet, there's literally over 100 sites where you can post what you want to do, and people post what they need, people to do. Some of my favorite are listed here, but there's so many sites where this model is already playing out, for many, many, many people. It's interesting. I teach a lot of the younger workforce in many of my classes. And I think a typical question you might get now from a candidate who is a Gen Z that you would never get before, say for my generation, is, so imagine you're in an interview and the interviewer says at the end of all of his or her questions, so do you have any questions for me? And the candidate says, yeah, why should I work here? And more important, how will you enable me to have meaning in my work here? And so if the employer can't answer this, the Gen Zer is out of there. And so this isn't just, an extra nice thing to have. It is something that really is number one on the minds of our younger generation. I'm really happy to see this, of course. So, companies really have to focus now on, how to build a strong employer brand. I think one of the main responsibilities of human resource professionals today is to figure out how to build a strong brand. to show that, look, you're going to make a difference here, and you're also going to have joyful work here. Because we understand that, people do their best work when it's joyful. And I said earlier, I've seen that all business indicators tend to go up when people, of course, enjoy their work. So what are the elements that really need to be in place for you to enjoy your work and for you to help others enjoy their work? Think back to when you were a child. You're 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, and you're running around on a playground at recess. I can remember when I was, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade, we had a recess, right? We went out to the schoolyard and we got to play for maybe 30 minutes. And we did different things. We went on the swings, we played ball, we climbed, we did different things just to have fun. And the idea was to do it as quick as possible because, at least when I was growing up, the teacher would go out on the schoolyard and he or she would ring a bell. And as soon as that bell rang, that meant freeze. So in your life, you really want to develop a supportive playground for yourself in your life. So it's also important to think about, your own self-awareness. What is the purpose of your life? And that's a very esoteric question. But if you're going to think about this for a moment right now, where do you want to make a contribution in the world? What are your values? In other words, what's most important to you? And how do you know if you're following most important? I've noticed that many adults tend to spend most of their day doing things that not only are not that important to them, but they don't enjoy it. And so I think it's critical to align, the purpose in your life and your values, and then ultimately the day-to-day behaviors. In other words, to ask yourself, am I behaving on a regular basis that aligns to my values? And if not, what can I do about that? Aligning your goals with your most important values, are critical. So this alignment, which is part of this model I've developed, I'll touch on it in a moment, called the 10P model. It's really important for you to think about, what is the purpose of your life? Where do you want to make a contribution right now? Where is your energy? What are your values? What's most important to you? How do you know if you're following what's most important? And, how do you know if you're not? And what can you do about that? And it's really critical then to align, at least a few goals, long-term, medium-term, short-term, to your most important values. It's also important to have supportive relationships. If you have friends and family who do not support the kinds of things that you want to do for your joyful work, that will cause a conflict. So it's important to build a strong team, a supportive team. As we get older in work, there's three words that are really important. Actually, 4 words. The first is significance. You have to ask yourself, is my work significant? And only you can answer that. It's very subjective. But if it is, and if it is not. Does my work make sense to me? That's really the word, called coherence. Is it clear to me why I'm doing this work? And if it's not, you're not going to be happy. Meaning, people would rather, I think, maybe talk about their romantic lives at work. But at the end of the day, if your work does not give you meaning, if you can't see meaning out of your work, it's going to be really hard to find joy. And finally, fulfillment. Imagine it's a hot summer day and you grab an ice cream and you're eating that ice cream. And it tastes so good. This is how work should feel. Your work should taste like that ice cream cone, fulfilling. So significance, coherence, meaning, fulfilling. I think these are powerful words to think about when it comes to joyful work. I think it's important to have courage and take some risk and be open to explore different possibilities. I found in life that what we focus on is what we get. And a lot of us, unfortunately, tend to focus on what we don't want. And, we move towards that. At the end of the day, I think it's important to be a little selfish. Because, if you're not happy in your work, those that you love and those that are around you are not going to be happy as well. And so it's important, as I like to call it, to give yourself, permission, accept yourself. And give yourself permission to pursue things that you really enjoy when it comes to your work. So over the years, I've developed several models and I've put them together here. I'm going to show you just very briefly what this model looks like. It's called the Joyful Work Model. And, there are many ways to put together a roadmap for your life. And I'm just going to show you one way with regards to joyful work. In my doctoral research, which I've written a book on called The 5 Stages, I discovered that there's no shortcut to authentic work, to joyful work. And what I learned is people tend to go through 5 stages, and I'll sort of briefly walk you through that. Stage 1 is what I call the treadmill. Have you ever been on a treadmill? It's kind of boring, right? You don't do it because you like it. You do it because you have to. So life is kind of like that. Work is kind of like that. We're on a treadmill. And then one day, maybe you're on a treadmill and someone attractive walks by and you look and you kind of slip. Maybe you fall off. Well, this is also what happens in life. We get sick. We have a relationship challenge. We lose our job. We have a money issue. We get sick and so on. And we fall off the treadmill. And that's stage 1. And that is the second stage, which I call the trigger event. So we're on the treadmill, same old every single day. Boom, something happens, right? Trigger event. We fall off the treadmill. When that happens, it's very important to not just brush ourselves off, get back on the treadmill and continue. When something happens in our life that makes us sad or uncomfortable, that's a good opportunity to move to stage 3, which I call reflection. So whenever something happens to you that you're not too happy about, this might be a good opportunity to reflect. Reflection can take an hour, it could take a day, take a month, it could take a year. But what's most important is you do spend time to reflect. And there's many models you could use. I developed a model called the 10P model as one way to put together a roadmap for your life and for your work. I've developed a workshop, which I'll talk about later, which you can take if you're interested, which will allow you to work with this model and in fact put your own roadmap together. But the idea is during stage 3, reflection, is to really think deeply about your life. And briefly, the 10P model here, as you see on the screen, has all P's because it has 10 of them. I've noticed that people like 10 steps. 10 steps to lose weight, 10 steps to stop drinking, and so on. But here's a healthier model. So you start with your purpose, and you kind of work clockwise. Prizes. What do you value most in your life? What is your perspective of you? If you don't feel good about yourself, it's going to be hard to feel good about others and about your work. Possibilities. And for each of these P's, there are a bunch of exercises that I recommend you go through. What's possible for you in your life? What's your place in the world, or role, R-O-L-E? What really, it's like a nice shirt fits you perfectly. What role, what is your place in the world, especially when it comes to your work? What's your daily attitude or behavior, which I call position? What work could you do that would give you a great attitude? What are you passionate about? How can you take several of your passions and put them together? The culmination of reflection, I think, is what I call, and it was my title of my first book, Perfect Vocational Day. If you could create a day from beginning to end that you could live over and over and over for the rest of your life, what would that pattern what would it be like? When would you get up? Where would you go? What would you do? And I call this Perfect Vocational Day. The 9th P is called present. There are 3 things that get in the way of joyful work, I've noticed in my research: money, relationships, and emotions. It's important to be emotionally strong. It's important to have a healthy relationship with money. And of course, it's important to have, like I said earlier, good relationships. And finally, the last P is called permission. You have to be able to give yourself permission to really pursue your passions and to pursue a way of working that is going to fit, just perfect for you. And so this is the 5 stages. And I noticed a few years ago that many of my clients would go through and understand the 5 stages, put together their 10P model, and then they would stop. And I decided that a third model needed to intersect here, which allowed people to have a way to implement their dreams. And so I created the final leg, if you will, of this joyful work model, which I call the 8 steps model. Why there's 8 steps or 10 versus 10, I don't know. But here are the steps. It's important to envision, spend time really visualizing, what your life will be like when you've reached your joyful work. To write it down, it's important. When we write things down, we externalize it. We talk to people, it starts to become real. And it's important to make big change. You can't make small incremental changes. It's important to make big change. As I like to talk about, build a support network with people who support your dreams, and make sure that a day doesn't go by without taking daily steps. And of course, you have to measure your progress, and you have to celebrate. When you celebrate, little baby steps towards your joyful work, this cycle kind of reinforces itself. And so anyway, this is the joyful work model. I'll talk later about how you might be able to work with this more. So what else can you do to enable your own joyful work? Well, like I said, it's important to develop your roadmap. I recently really put my life's work into a 90-minute seminar with lots of exercises. So when you're through with this, you end up with a roadmap towards your own joyful work. You can access that at udemy.com is where I host this. And in the last slide, I'll show you a link that you could use to access the class. Talked about aligning the abilities and interests and how important that is. Think about what's most important to you. Like, for example, what are the top 3 to 5 things that are most important to you? And what would you have to do on a daily basis to follow those? And what would you have to do to not follow those? Often it's knowing what you shouldn't do that helps inform you as to what you should do. It's really important to have a strong support network. Find other people that are doing what you love. You can learn from them. Find a mentor. We live in a wonderful age where within seconds we could pretty much research via Google whatever we choose. But it's so important now to focus on internal motivation. When you're internally motivated, that lasts a lifetime, versus when you're externally motivated, you're just waiting for the next person to say, good job, I like you, here's a pat on the back, here's a promotion. So you have to give yourself permission. No one's going to run up to you at the end of the day, especially your family members, and say, hey, how was it today? Did you give yourself permission to pursue your joyful work? Or no, with all due respect, an HR professional is probably not going to run up to you at work and say, hey, we have a new program called Authentic Work, and it aligns with the 401k. Are you interested? It's probably not going to happen. So in other words, this is something you have to think about yourself. So what can leaders and HR professionals do, now in practical ways to enable joyful work, especially before and after the pandemic? I think it's just important to ask people. I've had people tell me, well, you really can't measure whether people enjoy their work. And I say, of course you can. You ask people, do you enjoy your work? Why? Why not? And you're prepared to do something about that. I think it's important to enable people to develop, especially now, multiple skill sets. It's important to enable people to really work in ways that fit them best. How, what, where, why, when, as I discussed earlier. These days, there's so much what I call enabling technology, including social media, that enables people to work in ways that fit them best, that support collaboration. It's important to drop this old controlling management behavior. In some ways, for most of us, having to work at home has it's been painful for many people who feel like FaceTime is the most important thing. And if I can't see you, you must not be working. But I think to enable people to enjoy their work, we really have to stop the outdated micromanagement, behavior. Google was onto something. Back in 2012, they started a project called the Aristotle Project. And that's where they started shifting toward teams, understanding how teams work together, understanding that in their term, the operating language that needed to be in place for people to work well on teams. And I think they were onto something. And I think organizations have to do something similar now today, which is start to think about not only how can we enable joyful work, but how can we enable people to work in tandem to enjoy their work. As I said earlier, the pandemic has really placed a lot of additional pressure, on how we work. It's not clear that many people will ever go back to the office. In some ways, I think this is good. It really forces us to think about this idea of having a portfolio life, with multiple streams of income. I've noticed in, like most of you, I'm sure, having so many Zoom sessions every day, that people, I think empathy and just humanity between people has kind of increased. We see so many people now, with at home with their family members running around and noise and so on, and it's kind of brought us, I think, a little closer to each other. It's dropped that facade. So I think that's a good thing. But I've also noticed that a lot of us are getting what I call Zoom fatigue. And I think it's important as we look at how we work that we make sure that we're not just meeting to meet. That we're only having meetings where we really need to get together. I've noticed also that the workday is getting much longer, and this has to be managed to really avoid burnout. Despite how much we love our work, we have to find some balance. But I think with discipline, I think that we're going to do fine. One of the benefits of this Zoom era and all of us working at home is that, I'm finding, I don't know about you, that more meetings have to be scheduled versus all the interruptions, impromptu meetings we have at work, which frankly, I never liked, being a really organized person. There's nothing worse than enjoying your work, being in the zone, if you will, and then being interrupted. I think organizations have to also provide more social safety nets, as I call them, moving forward. And we're starting to see this with expanded mental health coverage, maintaining compensation where we can when people aren't able to work, supporting, as just a normal way of working, a flexible contingent worker model. I think in the future, we're going to need more and more flexibility in terms of adapting to different ways in how people work. You might have some full-time workers, you might have part-time workers, you might have people that work on Fridays, you might have people that you use every 3 months. So I think HR, as an example, will need to facilitate a lot more partnerships than they have in the past. I think there also needs to be a more of a focus, on results, versus time spent in the office. Clearly, that's forced us to reconsider that now. As I look at skills in the future, the skills I listed here, I think the ability to be more creative, to have skills that cross many different areas, to be critical thinkers, really thinking about what just happened and what does this mean and what can I do about this, looking at two different perspectives and so on. I think complex problem solving, critical thinking, these are all skills that not only support joyful work, but will help any organization continue to improve. But, not just the younger generation. I think all generations now are learning that this idea of seeking meaning at work is really, really important. So we're all looking now, I think, as a result of the pandemic, more human connections, more transparent communication. Don't wait to tell me something. Tell me something now in a respectful way. I think more and more adults want a voice in decision-making and how they work. We're seeing more support for education that's free that companies are providing. All of these things to kind of enable people to really enjoy what they do. And as I like to teach, and I'm happy to see, we're seeing more of a coaching model implemented, which I talk about in the humanistic leadership model, which I've developed. Finally, more companies are shifting to team-based models, and I think this is good. We're starting to see less of a focus on individual performance and compensation, and we're seeing a more shift towards team-based compensation and teamwork, and I think that's positive. So I think what we see now these days, because of the pandemic, is really what's called a paradigm shift. Thomas Kuhn in 1962 said a paradigm shift is when an important change happens, when the usual way of thinking about or doing something is replaced by a new and a different way. And so I think the idea of having meaning in work, in being able to decide when, how, where, why, and what you work on is no longer just an oddity, but really a true paradigm shift. And I'm happy to see that. I think we're going to see, a huge decline in physical offices, and we're going to see, of course, a design in just the way offices are set up, given the need to have social distancing and PPE and so on in the near future. And at the same time, despite how we continue to just try to do the same old every day, we are seeing that more of us are just feeling down or depressed as a result of COVID-19. And regardless of how we love our work, I think this is something we still have to support each other on. There's going to be days where you're just not going to feel that good because of what's going on. And when that occurs, you on one hand, you have to be able to have ways of supporting yourself. The organization has to have ways of supporting their people. And what's nice is when you do enjoy your work, your love of your work can actually get you through pretty much, I found, any crisis. We're seeing that more companies are starting to hire health workers. Telemedicine services are going to continue to soar. Employers are going to continue to want access to health data. I'm sure there are a lot of privacy issues that we'll have to address along the way. But as I said in the last bullet, companies are going to have to shift from being recession-proof to pandemic-proof. So what shouldn't we do? What shouldn't we do as we think about this topic of work, and especially joyful work? I think it's important not to treat adults as children at work. And historically, with a lot of our reward and punishment models, we typically have done that. We shouldn't treat remote work as unfairly. On one hand, I like that a lot of the high-tech companies such as Facebook are now telling people they could work at home, but don't base it on any specific criteria. So those of you that have good performance reviews can work at home, and those of you that don't, can't. So treat adults as children at work if you really want them to act like adults. If you want people to act like an owner of the company, you treat them as adults. If you treat them as children, they're going to act like they're on a time card. And you know the result that will give. Some employees will go in the wrong direction. In our virtual environment with everyone working at home, trying to track everything from virtual time clocks to computer usage and so on. But I think it's important to be sensitive here and not do that. As I like to say, avoid the urge, especially now, to micromanage. Remember, more and more people are asking this question: why should I work here? How will you enable me to have meaning in my work? I know that if I was interviewing these days, starting out in my career, and I asked those two questions and the interviewer couldn't answer these, I would be gone. So this is really important. As I discuss in humanistic leadership, the idea of putting people over profit. Profit's important, but it's how you make your profit. Do you make your profit by working, with people, enabling people to enjoy their work and be successful? Or do you make profit by, running over people? So these interview questions are interesting, and they will continue. So for you, as a result of listening to this presentation, please don't ignore the signals that work is, when work starts to seem routine and stagnant. As I've listed here are just some examples of really important questions to maybe go to the beach and try to answer. What is my life about? Who am I? I am a person who, what do I want in my life? And, how do I get there? And really, who do I want in my life? And I think these are really important questions to become more self-aware, which is a prerequisite for joyful work. I think, this is a common crisis, a pandemic. And I think through the common crisis, we've all found that we have something in common around the world that we didn't have before. And this can be a good thing. It can bring us closer together. I think right now, with the right innovation, we can transition to a more humane way of working together and apart. And I'm going to leave you with this thought, which is we all have the right to joyful work. And it should start with you, right now. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Most important, I hope that you take an hour, a day, a month to reflect and build your own roadmap to enable yourself to joyful work. You'll never look back, and the journey will be the best thing you've ever done. And you'll be a role model for others as well. So until next time, take care, everyone.